Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Ambassador McFaul, I am very sorry about the threats that you've had to endure. I assure you, Congress has your back. You are our ambassador in Moscow, and it was your job to deal with an increasingly aggressive Russia. We don't permit other countries to punish our diplomats for doing their job. You know, President Trump seems to love photo ops with dictators and summits that don't produce real results. In a recent article, you wrote that the Trump administration, quote, should not pursue engagement as an end in itself. Good relations with Russia or a friendly summit with Putin should not be the goal of U.S. diplomacy, but the means to achieve concrete national security ends. So can I ask you, Ambassador McFaul, briefly, because we're limited for time, when it comes to our relations with Russia, is the Trump administration making enough progress on the most urgent national security goals?
So first of all, thank you for your initial remarks. And I just want to remind everybody that I wasn't the only one on that list. I was there with a dozen other U.S. government officials and one staffer up here, Kyle Parker, and they were Democrats and Republicans. So remember, this is about us all. But I really appreciate the support. I did in July, and it made a difference, most certainly. More work to do on Interpol if we have time on that, but I'll come back to that in a minute. My general answer is the administration, I think, is doing a pretty good job. Just the President of the United States doesn't seem like he supports their policy. And that has consequences for the policy. It's not just they can do everything on their own and then the President won't mess it up. And we saw that in Helsinki. When Putin came out and set him up to create this false moral equivalency between the people that Mr. Mueller indicted and the 11 or 12 of us that Putin put on, and he said it was a great idea. That's not advancing America's national interests. And so I think generally, you know, if I were advising the president, I would say just focus on one thing to get done, and you know, New START treaty, extend it, and then don't do all the other stuff, because I honestly, thank you for quoting my article. I learned that from George Shultz, by the way. I don't want to take credit for that idea. He's a colleague of mine at Stanford. But I think he just doesn't understand that. I think he defines so many bilateral relationships, not just Russia, as getting along with the leader. Mostly they're autocratic leaders he's concerned with, and that, in my view, does not serve America's national interest. If there was a deliverable out of Helsinki, and you know, if he actually was friendly to Putin and he said, yeah, okay, I'm going to get out of eastern Ukraine, then I would celebrate it. But I see no evidence of that strategy succeeding.
Well, you know, Congress wants to push harder against Russia. Last summer, we overwhelmingly passed tougher sanctions on Russia, and over a year later, the Trump administration has not implemented 7 mandatory sections of this Russia sanctions law. Ambassador McFaul, do you believe there is any legitimate excuse for the Trump administration's failure to follow the law and to implement mandatory Russia sanctions that were passed by this Congress?
No.
You know, I think you're right on this, and you rightly point out that President Trump's own National Director of Intelligence said publicly that Russia keeps trying to undermine our electoral process, our energy grid, and other critical infrastructure. On the same day that President Trump signed the Russia sanctions law last year, he said, quote, "It disadvantages American companies and hurts the interests of our European allies to enforce these sanctions." So let me pose that as a hypothetical here. Ambassador McFaul, in the long run, which hurts American companies and our European allies more? The Russia sanctions law passed overwhelmingly by Congress, or Russia's cyber attacks, disinformation, and other destabilizing activities?
I think that's a great way to think about it, because we don't think about the non-events from our successful activities. So, for instance, back in 2014, Putin had other ideas. He wanted to take all of a place called Novorossiya. And first and foremost, Ukrainian soldiers stopped that idea. But maybe Ambassador Fried's work had something to do with that as well. If we didn't take those actions, things would be a lot worse. And I think that's a really important concept to think about the negative, including economic consequences. You know, I got lots of phone calls from lots of people who do business in Russia in anticipation of this hearing, as you can well imagine. And I like this argument that in the long run, this could be more costly to us all if we're in a confrontation. So remember the non-events that we don't know that maybe we are deterring that are beneficial to us and Europeans. The last thing I would say, I'm sorry, you can't have effective sanctions with zero cost for the ones that are implementing sanctions. I don't know of a case in history that there were effective sanctions that didn't somehow affect those that are doing the targeting. That's part of doing it, and you have to do that in the national interest, not just the individual interest of one company or one individual.
Well, thank you. You know, Congress can only do so much to confront Putin. We need a strong leader in the White House who clearly understands this threat and is willing to confront it, and right now, we don't have one. Thank you.